Have you ever had like a conversation about sexual health with members of your family or your community?
Yeah, I think that topic like sexual health is kind of a weird one. In my I feel like in a South Asian household in general, it's very like surface level. I feel like I'm really lucky that I belong to a household. I feel like that is really progressive, and I am a second generation Canadian, so it might be a little different than other South Asian households. I'm also really privileged in that my mom is a nurse, so she's always said, you can come to me with things and I will give you a nurse's perspective, not a mom's perspective. That being said, sometimes you don't want to ask your mom everything about sexual health. You would rather talk to someone else.
Yeah, that's an awkward conversation to have.
Exactly, because even if she's a healthcare professional, like you don't necessarily want to tell your parents, like you don't want to tell your family everything. So I would say like the conversations have been like more surface level, if anything. But I have been lucky in that she has said, like if you ever need like advice or like help, kind of more from a medical standpoint, I feel like though that I can always talk to her and reach out. But I think in the community at large, it's very not talked about. It's very like kept secretive, or like people assume that you aren't caring or like don't even want to know about your sexual health, even though that's not realistic or the reality. So I would say like for me particularly, the conversations have been very surface level.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like they're like outside of your family, like within like the healthcare system or a medical professional, do you feel comfortable with bringing up those topics about sexual health to a medical professional?
Yeah, I think it depends. I feel like I'm thinking about like my family doctor, for example, who's male and he's also of Asian background. I feel less comfortable bringing those things up with him just because there is this kind of like cultural thing about like, oh, I'm going to talk about this now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's for some reason you feel weird about it. And I think it is kind of like related to how some of us are like brought up. But I have talked about my sexual health with like a gynecologist, like a female gynecologist, and I feel more comfortable because it's like someone who specializes in sexual health and reproductive health and like is female. I personally feel more comfortable talking to someone like that versus like like a random doctor,
older white male,
a male, yeah, older white male, or even if they are South Asian, like it's just. And there's like this cultural stigma. So, yeah.
It's actually very interesting because I would imagine, actually, no, I agree with you in that sense that if I were to talk to at least a male from my background, I would feel a lot less confident speaking with them than if it were to be just a white male doctor.
Actually, yeah. I feel the same way. I don't know why. I think it's a cultural thing, right? Like of, not really talking about these topics normally, and just like, it's not normalized to seek help or seek resources. I feel like when it comes to your sexual health in certain cultures that we've kind of grown up with. So then it's kind of like, this is someone who's distant, kind of away from the culture. So maybe I can, talk to this person. I think it's kind of, for me at least, I feel kind of that way.
It's actually very interesting why we feel that way. Now that you brought it up, I'm like, I think if it was to be like a female who shares the same background with me, I would be a lot more comfortable with speaking with them. But like, as soon as it's a male, whether it's from my background or not, I'm like, no, absolutely not. I'm not speaking to you about these topics. You might be like the top leading gynecologist in Canada. It's like, no. No.
Yeah, I think I wonder why that is. Like, I do want to like, I don't want to say like, I do want to like give credit to male gynecologists because I think it's great that they specialize in gynecology. Like, I feel like we do need more gynecologists, but yeah, for some reason, just being a female, identifying as a female, like it's so much more comfortable to speak to a female figure about these things, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that brings up like another interesting thought, like the fact that like sexual health is discussed at a surface level, in both like our community, but also in school. We just learned that, hey, abstinence is the best method and wear a condom, but they don't really talk about anything else, like especially with like STIs or how to take care of yourself and your reproductive health. Like I am not gonna age myself here, but I still don't know if it's the right time for me to go to like a gynecologist and get myself checked out, because I never was taught or told like, hey, when you're pregnant
Exactly.
to this age, this is when you should start thinking about your reproductive health. Like, those conversations are never had.
I agree with that. I went to a Catholic school, and I had a great experience at Catholic school. Even though I'm not Catholic, I felt super welcome, and I just really liked seeing that culture. And yeah, I don't know. I think this has to do a little bit with my upbringing. We were kind of like I celebrate Christmas and Diwali, and like all like I celebrate everything basically. So like I really enjoyed seeing like their culture, and the religion, learning about the religion, the history, things like that. But one of the things was like, I remember in ninth grade learning about sexual health, and it was just very different from what my friends at public school were learning. But also, it's not necessarily that it was like better or worse, it was just different. We were kind of, taught like, okay, like, don't have sex and you will get all these STIs and this is why you shouldn't. There was no talk about, well, when I am maybe not, in ninth grade for me, definitely not ninth grade, but like maybe when I'm older, like, I'm going to actually need resources. I'm going to need contraception. I'm going to need more information, like, about different birth control methods. Like I remember just like learning about all these different birth control methods actually when I was growing up and started going to university. And I know my friends were like, oh, I'm on the IUD, I have a patch, I have that. And I was like, all these things exist. Like I had no idea. And I feel like we always like commonly like hear about the pill and like this type of stuff, but I didn't realize that there were actually a wide, array of options to choose from. And I was thinking about this, about like my education. So it's interesting that you bring this up because I was like, it was exactly the same thing. It was like just abstinence. And then if you do it, you're going to get STI, but that's not realistic, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, it's just, that's, they like kind of like scare you a little bit. And you actually don't get, like, you don't know where to go then, like when you are ready to kind of look into your sexual health and that type of thing, like you're kind of lost. You're kind of like, should I be scared or like, where do I go? Because no one ever told you where to go.